What's interesting, you meet these men, they come in, they are very soft. Their movement, their presentation of themselves, the way they interact with the world is soft. Their bodies don't know what to do. And then they get hit a couple of times. Enough that he knows he's gotten hit. The first time, it's shocking. By the third time, it's interesting. By the 10th time, they're looking forward to it.
You're a man living in the modern world in a time when men and manhood are not what they once were. You live life on your own terms. You're self-sufficient. You think for yourself, and you march to the beat of your own drum. When life knocks you down, you get back up, because in your gut, you know that's what men do. You're a badass and a warrior, and on the days when you forget, we are here to remind you who you really are.
Welcome to Solid Man Podcast, where we aim to make men masculine again. I'm your man, Nicky Ballou, and we have a very special guest for you today, Joseph Riggio. Welcome, Joseph.
Thank you much, Nicky. Appreciate being here.
Good to have you. So I interviewed you on my business podcast, and we had such a good time that I wanted to have you back on my men's podcast. And this is going to be a different conversation, but I think we ought to start it in a similar fashion. Why don't you just tell the folks your backstory, how you got to be in the work that you do?
Backstory goes back a few different chapters, so to speak. Early on, kind of growing up in the city of Newark, New Jersey, a little bit, won't quite call it hard scrabble, but really an urban environment during the 67 to 69 riots that were occurring back then.
Wow.
So the neighborhood was tough. I remember going to sleep some nights with mattresses up against the windows because there were some bullets flying through the neighborhood. So it was kind of an interesting experience,
Wow. That's crazy, bro.
Yeah, I was a young boy. I was in my early teens, actually 10 years old at the time when it started. So, and then growing up, my father was a contractor, so I decided to become an architect. And the reason that's important is because I love the concept of design, how things are structured, how things go together and are built, and the physicality of putting things together with one's hands and building stuff. And that's kind of deeply imprinted. Real quick story going forward, left that business because it became computerized, and I didn't want to live at a desk in front of a computer all day long and, output through digital means. I wanted to do something that felt like it was connected to being alive and being human. So crazy as I was at the time, I left that business, sold my partnership off to the guys who were joining me as founders, and I began training dogs, which I had done as a teenager. So,
no kidding.
Train dogs for a living, real high-end protection stuff, working with super aggressive animals, which was just a blast, Nicky. I mean, you're just standing there and you've got this 80-pound pit bull on the end of a leash that somebody's holding, and they let it go and it hits you on a sleeve and your world is rocked for a few seconds.
No kidding, eh?
That was actually a blast. And I had been a martial artist since I was 11 years old, and I was a relatively high-level martial artist at that time, competitive boxer. And I began training some folks in the military, some of the special operative guys, in hand-to-hand combat, which was a blast. So I had a bunch of different backgrounds, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I eventually began studying this thing called neuro-linguistic programming,
NLP,
and opened up a consulting practice around it. Went back, did some more graduate work, wound up getting a PhD in neuroscience around decision-making at a business school, and realized that that was the key. For me, everything that happens or doesn't happen is predicated on the ability to make a decision that makes sense in the moment. And whether that's a critical in-time decision, like the guys I was working with in Special Forces and had a chance to work with around this model, or whether it's somebody who's making a decision about what they're going to have for dinner and whether they'll feel well afterwards or not, that kind of thing. So I built a model, and I've been working with people around the world ever since on how to make decisions that are predicated on the internal stance that you hold. What goes on that shapes the perception field that you have, how you make sense of the world and what is reality. And a lot of my clients now are in a position we could call wobble, where they at one point made decisions easily and confidently, and stacked up over years and years. And now at their high end of decision making, they're making critical decisions in some cases literally spending billions of dollars on projects that are planned out over 10 years as senior executives in international corporations. They're not as confident as they once were. And that's not a function of not having the information or not knowing how to make decisions. It's almost as though something distorted internally for them. So we recalibrate that and put it back on track, and their world changes.
You know, what you do is fascinating. I think it's very unique. Not a lot of people in the world understand how critical it is to be able to make decisions quickly and effectively.
Mhm.
And I think from the point of view of the theme of this podcast, being of service to men, I'd love to have you share your thoughts on what you think has happened culturally and societally in North America, because we've gone from a period where for hundreds of years in Western society, the roles of men and women were very clearly understood.
Sure.
And then seemingly out of the blue, in the early to mid 1960s, the so-called feminist movement came out and upended all of that. Now, that didn't happen all over the world. It's happened specifically in the Western world, and in particular in the United States, Western Europe, etc. But it has had an impact. Some people think the impact's been good, but a lot of other people, myself included, feel the impact has been mixed to negative.
Right.
And I'm wondering what you think happened and how you think men today can become more powerful, more confident decision makers.
It's a great question. And just as an aside, real quickly, my wife agrees with you. Feminism was not necessarily all it was cracked up to be.
No.
And she always says when she gets to heaven, she's going to find the woman who started it and have it out with her. So I live with a woman who's living inside that space.
There you go.
The thing is, Nikki, we both know 1960s was a volatile time. And it wasn't, as you said, just the United States, but there was a transition in culture that was happening. And in the United States, it was reinforced and nurtured because of, to some extent, our involvement in Vietnam and the lack of moral certainty that had existed prior to that about the United States and our exceptionalism and what we stood for and our moral justification for being in a war. And now all of those things were being mixed up. Simultaneously, you're right, there was a cultural revolution where people began to question what it meant to have an identity. Because before that, the identity was both internal and externally presented and reinforced, right? So you knew what it meant to be a man. And therefore, you acted in a particular way, which kept those markers in place, almost ritualistically, so that you could identify yourself comfortably within your own skin. As those markers began to devolve and people didn't have the external support that they could identify with, if my hair is cut a certain way, if I wear a certain kind of clothing, if I use certain kind of language, if I have a certain kind of job, I'm clearly a man, I have a masculine quality to me, then it began to become obscured and our identities weakened. They softened. And this led to, again, we could spend hours on this, and I know we don't have hours, so I'm not going to go there, but a distortion in the fundamental stance of the individual that is very directly related to the work I do. That in order for a person to know who they are, how they feel that's outside of consciousness, and how they represent themselves publicly, and how that gets fed back to them in feedback from others, have to all match. If that's incongruent, the person feels unstable. And the problem is when a man today presents himself with what we can call traditional masculine qualities, they're being challenged by society. And he has to question, is there something wrong with me? And one of the things I would point to is in a lot of species, including the human species, and I have a bit of a scientific background, so I apologize for a little of my nerdiness up front. In the human species, it's not uncommon for men to be somewhat more aggressive than women. We have evolved to protect and to provide for our families. And sometimes that means taking on the world and making sure those who are closest to us are safe. So we can be a little bit more volatile. And I could even, again, talk about brain structure and how our brains are wired, that men arrive at decisions more quickly than women. And some of those decisions are triggered by a part of the brain called the amygdala, which presents a violent front. And if a man today is violent in an appropriate way, I'm not talking about committing a crime, I'm not talking about harming someone, but even standing up forcefully to someone, that's toxic masculinity. But it feels right to me. Somebody just insulted my wife. Somebody just threatened my child. Somebody crossed me in a way that was physically violent and almost led to an altercation. And now I'm confronting them physically and forcefully, and people are telling me my behavior is toxic. It doesn't make sense to me. So who am I, right? We have to be able to resolve this internally and go, it's okay to do what you just did. And it's okay that you understood there was a boundary to it as well, and you didn't cross that boundary and do something inappropriate or criminal. And to be treated as though you had is inappropriate from society. And yet this is the message that keeps getting reinforced for any man who acts in what had traditionally been, for not thousands, tens or hundreds of thousands of years, in what we can call a masculine way.
Yeah. So we don't tolerate that phrase toxic masculinity on this show. I think that's a misandrist statement.
It is. Absolutely.
And so we don't tolerate that here. And I don't tolerate it in real life. Anybody uses it, I hammer them. I hammer them really hard. And I'm an Iranian man from a very traditional culture, but if a woman uses that phrase in front of me, she is going to feel my wrath very quickly.
Right.
Verbally, of course, appropriately, but
appropriately, as I said,
feel my damn wrath. And I ran into a woke feminist woman who started to use that phrase in front of me, and I cut her off. She tried to talk over me, and I wouldn't let her. And I said, that is sexist. You need to stop right now, or we're done. We're done. Our relationship is done right here, right now. And she backed off, but it's nothing we tolerate here. So I want to just be very clear about that. But I want to go back to the original question I had, because you described what happened very well. Well, why do you think it happened? Why do you think, seemingly out of the blue, and only in Western society, these changes took place? Do you think it was organic? Do you think it was not organic? And why?
I think it was a combination of organic and agitated, or an agenda that was being propagated, right? I think if you want to make a society submissive, you have to dismantle parts of it. And one of the parts of it that you have to dismantle is the nuclear family, that unit that is in the Western culture, organized in both patriarchal and matriarchal ways, different distinctions, as you said. Men and women's roles were clearly defined. And that identification allowed the nuclear family to exist the way it did. I do this, you do that. I represent this, you represent that. You know, one of my favorite characters out there, you could call him, is a guy named Joseph Campbell, who you probably heard of.
Hero of a Thousand Faces.
Absolutely. And
Great
Joseph
guy.
Campbell, talks about the idea of this, differentiation between men and women, and what identified men and women as being different in their roles, and the maternal and paternal character. And he makes it very clear that there was a breakdown, an intentional breakdown, as early as the 1930s or 40s, to allow women to infiltrate men's spaces, but the corollary was never supported. So you can have a women's club legally that is unique to women, but it's very difficult, if not illegal, to hold the club to purely men today as a social environment. And so you can't say that there was no government or a larger scope agenda that was in place. And a lot of it had to do with the country was becoming very comfortable, very successful. People were moving up economically. The gap between the wealthiest and the poorest was closing aggressively. The middle class was doing better than it had in virtually all of history. And that meant, to some extent, the wealthiest and most elite were threatened. And we began to see a pushback against that. We began to see a challenge. And one of the other things that was happening is that, especially in minority cultures, whether that was the Black American culture, or that was some of the American ethnic cultures, or that was the minority of women, in terms of some of the authority or power or access they had was being pushed to the surface. And there was a demand for equality at a level, again, that had never existed in any society almost on the planet. So we live fundamentally, Nikki, in a caste system. And the caste system is not defined as it was once by birth.
No.
It's defined to some extent by external circumstances. And now that includes if you're a man or a woman. And I know you don't like the term that I used, and so I won't say it again. Don't want to aggravate that. But what I will say is there's another term which you probably don't like as much, which is the idea of white privilege. And this is a redefining of the caste system, where once that was in fact a privilege and put you in a privileged position, it had to be degraded so that these other positions could be risen up and there could be an equality, and that equality actually degraded everyone. So now we see a big gap again between the wealthiest and the poorest, and the upper caste. I'm not calling it class. I'm using the word caste, C-A-S-T-E.
Yeah, I know which one you
is
mean.
now repositioned in a way to have more control, more concentration of wealth, and it in part demands a control of the population. You don't want strong men. If you want to control the population, you sure as heck don't want strong men.
After World War II, there was a group of folks that had fought in the war that came back in America, and they found their town to be under the control of a corrupt political establishment and police force. And the men got together, banded together, overthrew these guys, and took back their town. I can't imagine that happening today.
You can't have that. You can't have that. You know? I mean, I'm going to give you an example if you don't mind.
Yeah.
There's a movie I've never seen, and I made a choice never to see it. I never will see this movie, and it was Brokeback Mountain.
Yeah, same with me.
And the reason I chose not to see it, I have many friends, and I have no issue with homosexuality. I really, truly could care less what people do in the privacy of their life.
Yep.
I have no issue with the decisions that people make about who they want to love or how they want to respond to people at a sexual level. Not my issue.
No, mine neither.
What I had an issue with is you took a standard, strongly held American convention and an icon of America, which was the American cowboy, and you had to make sure that you distorted the image and the idea of what that represented for years and years, decades, centuries, into something that was now a piece of social engineering.
Yeah,
and
I had a real problem with it for a similar reason.
You know, but it's there. Yeah. And it was a wild success. Think about that. How many people did like it and how much praise it got and critical acclaim and all this other stuff. And never once was it brought to the surface that basically was done in order for it to have all that stuff go on was the degradation of an American critical icon.
Great. Yeah, no, it's what it was. I agree with what you're saying 100%. I don't think it was organic at all, to be quite frank with you. I think the rise of the feminist movement was entirely engineered. And I think without this engineering, it would have never happened. So back in 2020, I was introduced to the work of a former CIA case officer named Kent Clisby. And he wrote a book in 2011 called Willing Accomplices. And Kent is not a natural born communicator. He's not a writer. So if you ever decide to buy the book, and I highly encourage you do when you read it, the first 30 or 40 pages are a tough slog because he's not a good writer. But once you get past that, you won't be able to put it down because he makes a very compelling case that what's going on in the West vis-a-vis the degradation of traditional masculinity in men and manhood was a deliberately engineered project by Vladimir Lenin beginning in 1917. 1917, Russia became the world's first communist state. And Vladimir Lenin, unlike Marx, had a vision of the entire world becoming communist. See, he's the Leninism part of Marxism-Leninism, right? So, but he realized that Russia was too weak to militarily make that happen. And the biggest obstacle to his dream, his vision, was the United States. So he came up with a plan, a multi-decade plan to weaken the United States from within. He wanted to use the United States' very openness as a society against it. So he had a German communist who was one of his acolytes, a gentleman named Willy Münzenberg,
Hmm.
and he charged him with moving to the United States and told him, your mission is to infiltrate American institutions, and the following three institutions in particular: education, media, Hollywood. And you're to start putting in our narrative into these institutions and find willing accomplices, progressives in the United States, to help you with this project.
Hmm.
Mr. Münzenberg did this. Mr. Münzenberg fell out of favor when Stalin came to power, and I think he was executed. But the project he started in the United States and the rest of the Western world continued.
Hmm.
The Cold War that began in 1945 and ended with the defeat of godless communism did not stop the movement within American and Western society to weaken them from within. The rot had set in, as it were. And so 1989 through 91, the communist regimes in Russia and Eastern Europe all fell.
Mm-hmm.
But Marxism and cultural Marxism had taken root in the United States and in most Western countries. And a big part of what they did was they wanted, as you say, to weaken the nuclear family, to weaken men, because how do you conquer a society? You make sure that their men aren't strong enough to fight back against you. And that was the entire plan. And unfortunately, they had some brilliant manipulators come and work with women. And women are magnificent. I love women. I think they have certain qualities and strengths and skills that we as men don't have. Unfortunately, they also have certain weaknesses we don't have, and we have certain weaknesses they don't have. Let's just be honest. We can be manipulated in ways that are just, a woman would shake her head at that and go, oh my God, the man, he's thinking with his, you know what?
And they do.
and really dumb decisions have been made of major import because of that by men. But really dumb decisions have been made by women of major import. And one of them was to buy the feminist lie that, hey, you are being oppressed. You deserve better. All of her complaints were validated. And in the work that I've done with some sociologists who work with women, they say one of the key ways that women get status in the world is when they complain. They don't actually want their complaints solved. You ever had your wife tell you about all the things that went wrong in the day, and as soon as you start trying to solve her problem, she jumps down your throat? You ever had that happen? Because I know I have, right?
She's actually named it. It's when she needs to vent.
That's it. But most women don't know that's what they need to do. What are you doing? You're not listening to me. I'm solving your problem. They had their complaints not just named, but extolled. And as a result, this spread like wildfire. Hmm. And women in the West started to buy the lie that they'd been oppressed. They'd never been oppressed. They just had a different series of roles than men did. Now, you can make the point, and I would say it's a valid point, that many opportunities were denied to women in the past, and that's a valid point. And if there's women who wanted those opportunities, they ought to have been given a chance to have them. I agree with all that. What I don't agree with is the lie that they were being oppressed. Okay. And that lie, unfortunately, from the early 60s to 2026 has led to, as you say, the degradation of the masculine ideal and the degradation of manhood, the concept of manhood. And there's men out there today that would hide behind their girlfriend's skirts if a guy came and attacked them, rather than standing in front of her and beating the crap out of the guy or die trying.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what I'm trying to say here?
Oh, yeah. I understand completely.
Yeah.
So let me, there's just two things, Nikki, that jump out at me really quickly. Is number one, my comment that it was both organic and engineered is that the organic piece was that there was a certain willingness or readiness in culture and society for that message to take root.
That's fair.
There are certain societies, certain cultures, even in America, subcultures we can call them, where that message never took root and still isn't taking root.
Yeah.
One of the ones that a guy named John Taylor Gatto, who was a big influence of mine, an educator, talks about is in the Amish society, that doesn't exist.
No.
Right? So he points out the distinctions to some extent of the Amish society and why they have this difference of opinion. And part of it is, as you said, the difference between godliness and godlessness is part of it. So there was an organic organization. The second thing is, it didn't start in the 1960s. We had suffragettes in the early part of the century.
We did.
So there was something going on there. And you have to remember, it was in the 1920s that Prohibition occurred.
Yep.
And Prohibition was a forerunner to beginning to test the limits of how far you could push the population to limit and take away their rights and present them with forms of control that had not been in place before, that they were now being forced to accept. And so we've been tested consistently, and I'm going to argue and have argued publicly that the whole COVID pandemic was another red flag test.
It totally was. It was. And
it was not that it didn't happen. We know there was a real thing. There were people getting sick, but the way it was handled, the exaggeration of it, the quote unquote issue that the average healthy person was confronted with just never existed. It was very dangerous for compromised people who had compromised immune systems.
Over the age of 80.
We saw that. Yeah, we saw it. And so we're not going to argue with the reality of it. But then it was played out to test, can we get people to hunker down in their homes, wear masks, stand 3 feet apart, whatever the heck the rules were, for years. Give up the ability to meet with their loved ones. Give up their ability to have their children in a social environment, in a school environment where they socialized and engaged. These things were not random.
No, they weren't.
It's hard to argue they were random. And the reality is, if we had a society of those men you referred to who had come back from World War II, who took back their town, it probably wouldn't have happened. So I know men who didn't accept those rules. I know men who pushed back. I know men who said, no way. I know military men who said, I'm not getting vaxxed. I don't care if you exclude me from the military as a result, despite the fact that I've given the military 10, 20 years of my life, and I have a massive commitment to what it means to be a soldier, a sailor.
For sure. No, 100%, man. 100%.
And so I agree with you. Totally engineered. And by the way, I know some of that story you shared about the infiltration of American society. And when you think about it, I don't have the facts as validated as I would love, but when I look at the correlations between what did happen in education and Hollywood, I sure as heck can see the pattern unfolding there. And so I think we could also make an argument that the same pattern, to some extent, was played out in a different way in religion as well. And the removal of religion from the home.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I agree.
By the way, I don't think it's a fatal disease. I think men can recapture their masculinity. I think men can very quickly reestablish themselves to an identity that is very strongly masculine in a very positive way.
Yeah.
And they can retake that position that I would argue is, I would call it, Nikki, because of my own beliefs, a God-given right, but let's call it a natural born right. That as a function of what we're born as men is our right to exhibit and express ourselves through.
As
and
masculine men. Yeah, 100%.
It's very easy to come back.
I agree. I mean, that's the whole reason I have this podcast. I have a community of men called the Sovereign Man. We run something called the Sovereign Circle. And the whole reason we exist is to do that. We have men in our community that are experienced men like me, like you, at our level. And we got men that are, less experienced in life and less certain of their masculinity, but we're helping them get in touch with that warrior within and bring out their badass. I say every man is a warrior and every man is a badass. He's just forgotten it for a while. And my job and what I do is to remind him who he really is.
Yep. I'm going to tell you an interesting thing. It's, excuse me for interrupting you there. I teach martial arts. I'm a martial arts instructor. And the martial art that I teach is called Warrior Flow. And it's a very physical art. We are engaging literally in a physical way. And what's interesting, you meet these men and they come in, and Nikki, they are very soft. And I don't mean just physically. They're physically soft. Their bodies are soft. But their movement, their presentation of themselves, the way they interact with the world is soft. And so when you're working with them and you begin to do sparring, it's their bodies don't know what to do. And then they get hit a couple of times. And we actually, I'll hit a man in the chest, I'll hit him in his shoulder. And I'm hitting him in a way that's not going to do damage. I'm not looking to hurt him or bruise him or break something, but enough that he knows he's gotten hit. The first time, it's shocking. By the third time, it's interesting. By the 10th time, they're looking forward to it because they feel like they're now engaging and they're ready to hit back.
Yeah.
And as soon as that transition occurs, where they go through the threshold of the excitement of being able to know they can be hit and it didn't kill them, and they can hit back as a result or response to that, they start becoming very interesting to work with. I actually have to make sure that my skills are in place and I'm getting out of the way because they're throwing. And it's exciting. It's exciting for them. It's exciting for me, frankly. And they change who they are. And all of a sudden, they'll come back a week, 3 weeks, a month, 6 months, a year later, whatever it is. And they go, I was in a parking lot. And some guy made a comment to my wife. It was really interesting, Joseph. I turned to this guy. And as soon as I turned to him, he went, get the hell, you're just nothing. He walked away. He said there was something he picked up from the way I was behaving that he knew he had crossed the line and I was ready to stand my ground. I didn't even have to do anything. And people think that you have to elevate this to the level of violence. When you're capable of violence, the world knows.
Yeah.
And it doesn't go there as easily. It can go there, but it doesn't go there as easily.
No question. No question. There's a lot we can talk about. And honestly, Joseph, I'd love to have you back on both shows to get into some of the topics that you brought up. I enjoy speaking to you, man. I really, really enjoy speaking to you. And I think you make me think, which not every guest does. And that's really good for me as a human being. It's good for me as a man because it forces me to question some of my assumptions. It forces me to validate other ones and frankly, even discard some. But let's go back to this conversation. So there is a Russian defector from the 1980s who was the KGB's country destabilization expert. His name was Yuri Bezmenov.
I know Yuri.
Yeah, so he did an interview. It's available on YouTube. It's almost 2 hours long. And he explains in exquisite detail how the Soviet Union went about destabilizing a country and taking it from a stable country to one that was susceptible to revolution. And being an Iranian, I can see some of their work in Iran during the 1970s before the Islamic Revolution overthrew His Majesty Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah and Shah of Iran. And I think it's important for Western men to be aware that these destabilizing forces, these agitator forces exist today in the West, in the United States. And from the point of view of a observer, I think the United States is the country in the world right now that is best positioned to reverse this tide because they elected a very strong masculine man as their leader. Donald Trump is a man you don't mess with. You know that phrase that's out there these days?
Yeah.
FAFO, F around and find out. Like with Donald Trump, the world has found out. Like, it's like when he comes out and he says, I don't like this, you better shift or else. That or else is a real thing. That or else is not a paper or else, right? And people are saying, oh my God, Trump got elected, but look, China, they're going to probably invade Taiwan. Yeah, China ain't invading Taiwan. I'm assuring you China ain't invading Taiwan.
Well, not for the next 2 years.
3 and a bit.
You know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know exactly.
We don't know what's going to happen next.
No, we don't. But listen, I'm an Iranian. I'm from a humanitarian point of view, from a Iranian patriot point of view. I'm thrilled that Donald Trump has taken the steps he's taken against the Islamic regime. I believe that regime is going to be overthrown, and I believe there'll be a pro-Western Iranian regime in place sometime this year. Okay, I thought it would have happened by now, but I'll give them credit for having had more staying power than I thought they had. But it was the most boss of moves that he pulled against China, because China's source of oil supply had been Iran and Venezuela. What did Donald Trump do? He took both of those off the board.
Hmm?
You think China's going to mess with Trump right now? China right now is like trying not to piss him off too much. You know what I mean? Because they know this is a dude that's got their number. They've been smarter than every other American president that's been around since the year 2000 by a country mile, but not this guy. And right now they are scared shitless of him, quite frankly. And I believe that um, I believe that what's going to happen in 2028 is JD Vance will probably be the nominee. Now, is he going to be Donald Trump? No, but I also don't think he's going to be a wuss. I think he's going to be a guy who's going to follow through on a lot of Trump's policies on foreign policy and with China. He's not going to cave into those guys. And I think his running mate's going to be Marco Rubio.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know how closely you've been following politics in your life. You sound like you have, and you understand, and you've seen people come and go throughout your life. But I studied international politics and American politics in particular in university, and I have as a very dedicated and ardent amateur ever since. Okay, so for the last 35, 40 years, ever since the Islamic Revolution in Iran, I've been interested in this stuff. Marco Rubio is the toughest, smartest, best Secretary of State America has had since Henry Kissinger, by a country mile. Marco Rubio being the vice president and JD Vance being the president, which I believe is going to happen in 2028.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you're going to see a 20-year period of America having good, strong, masculine leaders. And that's good for the world. That's my take on it.
Mm-hmm.
Could I be wrong? Absolutely. Everyone could be wrong in their predictions. But that's what I think is going to happen. I think the modern Democratic Party is so feminized, so weak, so unable to do anything other than scream and yell that they hate Donald Trump as their response to everything, that they're going to stop being taken seriously by a big part of the American electorate. And in my opinion, as long as Trump's president, their ability to play shenanigans in elections is going to be limited. So this is what I think is going to happen. It's my take.
Listen, I tend to lean strongly in your direction across the board on those comments. I'm not quite as sure or confident as you are about the Vance Rubio, mix of being elected. I think America's still confused, and I really do. I think that there's a very strong pull, not just in America, but if you look what's happening, even in terms of the most recent speech that King Charles made.
Yes.
He's a very eloquent guy, speaks beautifully.
Yes.
But when you listen to what he says, there's not a lot of substance behind it. There's a lot of hopeful wishing and inspirational phrasing, and not, here's what we need to do, here's what we're going to do, here's where the line is drawn in the sand. And again, from a masculine point of view, a men's point of view, a man's point of view, one of the things that men do, and again, we can identify this however you want, evolutionarily, psychologically, physiologically, men draw lines in the sand. They go this far and no further. And when you begin to take that away from the identified men in the world, the men who are speaking, and a lot of them are, frankly, today, looked up to, are entertainers, whether they come from the world of music or they come from the world of Hollywood or theater. And they've been, to some extent, what I'm going to use the phrase, demasculinized, in the sense of unwilling to draw a line in the sand, to have an unbearable level of tolerance and acceptance.
Yeah.
And this is, I go back to your comment about when you said, women were sold the idea of oppression. And the conflation between truth and fabrication was brilliant, because it was true that women, certain women, particular women, ran into issues where they were living with inappropriately dominant men who wanted to control them and run their lives in a way where they had no freedom whatsoever. And because of the way the society was set up, the women had no choice. They literally could not support themselves independently. And now, again, I'm going back 1920s, early 1900s, not 1960, 1920s. And that was one of the things that was used to leverage the idea that the suffragette movement had to move forward to give women rights, in many cases, simply to become independent financially, as simple as things like being able to inherit wealth. That was a limitation. And now that was taken to an extreme level where it was presented as though every woman was a sufferer, was a victim and being oppressed by that.
Which is outrageous, which is absolutely outrageous.
Absolutely. So you had, let's pick a number, 0.1% of the female population in the Western world was actually under that kind of oppressive behavior. But it became 99% as a mental presentation, and was sold very effectively. And
it was.
it's still being done. Listen, I watch movies and I watch television shows, and Nikki, these days, about 50% of them, I don't make it through. There's an event that they present to me where I go, that's too much.
Yeah,
Like,
that's why I watch older TV shows and older movies all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. My wife's a Pluto addict with me. So we're watching all of those old movies that are on Pluto and all the old TV shows.
Nice.
I Love Lucy,
I Love Lucy's great. Rockford Files, Magnum PI, Miami Vice from back in the day. They're tremendous. So the Rocky movies, the Godfather movies, those were movies that portray anything with John Wayne, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant. Those are fantastic movies. I'm into. I agree with what you're saying. I'll tell you why I feel very confident. I feel very confident for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm naturally an optimist. So, one of my mentors once said, optimists and pessimists are both equally diluted, but optimists live longer. So I'm going to err on the side of optimism for that reason. But secondly, I think there is a sense in people today that they've been lied to, that they've been hoodwinked. And one thing that nobody can say about Donald Trump is that he's lying to them and he's hoodwinking them. They may not like him. They may not like his presentation. They may not like how mean he is, but they know he's telling the truth. And I think there's a hunger out there in the world for truth tellers, a hunger that the folks that have been pulling the wool over our collective eyes for so long don't fully comprehend. They don't understand what level of skepticism people have and how more and more people are listening to everything they're being told and questioning it. I'm an Iranian. When the Islamic Republic took over, we knew they were lying to us 24/7, 365. So I came into this milieu believing I was being lied to. And then I said, the Western media doesn't do that. Now I'm going, they're absolutely doing it. They're propagandists just like the Iranian media was under the Ayatollahs. And more people are starting to think like me. I believe that the 28 election will be an election where Donald Trump will be used by the Republican campaign of J.D. Vance to go out there and do the rallies and pull out the troops. And I think he's going to be extremely effective. If they pull the SAVE Act into legislation, or if Trump somehow makes it an executive order, if they don't, and they can't pull the shenanigans they've been pulling when it comes to elections, in my opinion, in fair elections right now, the Democrats are lucky to pull 42%. Lucky. I think the country is going to vote Republican at a 58% level in a fair election, right? Where you don't have, shenanigans being pulled. You don't have people that are not citizens voting and that sort of thing. And I think that's going to be that way for a while. What's going to happen to the Democratic Party is what happened to the Republican Party in the 50s and 60s, when the Democrats had won 5 elections in a row with FDR and Truman, right? They're going to have to be beaten so badly that they go, crap, we're going to have to change our ways if we ever want to get back into power. And that's what's got to happen. So that's my thought about this. But let's wrap this up with just some of your thoughts on what do you think modern men need to do to make better decisions than they're currently making?
Listen, I would love an opportunity to sell my work, and you just opened the door for you. I want to do something else that I think answers the question more radically and more importantly, and I'd rather help the audience. And that is immerse yourself in the narratives of real men. You mentioned a few things. The reality is some of what John Wayne did, not just on screen, but who he was as a human being.
Yeah.
Begin to look at men who represent the ideals that you'd like to live to, whether those are in fiction or whether they are in biography, doesn't really matter. But you want to saturate your own brain with the kind of identity that is representational of what you're aspiring to. So that's the first thing. And if you can reset that internal position, which is what my work is all about, then something shifts for you. The challenge with what men can do in the model of work that I do is really an intervention from the outside, noticing what the individual can't notice about themselves. So the subtle somatic tics, the ill-formed structure of language they're using, the distortions in what we call paralinguistics, the tone, the volume, the pace, the rhythm of their speaking as it changes and as they're moving through topics or talking about a decision. Those things have to shift, but you don't notice it from the inside. So what you need is an external model that you can identify with and go, how would that person do this? Am I deciding like this person I admire, or am I defaulting to a decision structure that is in fact a collapse of my own identity and my own being, right? So men have to come back to knowing themselves. If you're not inside yourself, and frankly, to use a very overused phrase that's totally appropriate, if you're not in love with yourself first, it's hard to make any of this other stuff work, Nikki. You've got to know who you are and accept yourself, warts and all. So it's not, I'm in love with myself because I'm perfect. It's, I'm in love with myself and I know the stuff that's a limitation. I know where my weaknesses are, and that's okay because I also know where my strengths are.
Yeah.
And I can play to my strengths. And you made a comment, you're an optimist. I've built my life and my practice and my work and my relationships on building positive orientation to the world. I view the world through a rosy lens to some extent.
Good man.
And what happened was, you know, if I use the most personal example I can, the choice to be with the woman that I married, I chose her because she didn't need to be with me, and I don't need to be with her. So therefore, we were both free to choose one another without the oppressive sense that we needed to be in each other's lives for us to be happy or complete. Now, we have something more since we've joined and since we are a couple than we had when we were separate and independent. But she knows if something happened tomorrow and I get hit by a truck, she's going to survive. She's going to be okay. She knows how to make herself in the world. And God forbid something happened to her, I would mourn her and it would be a tragic event in my life. But my life will go on and I'll still have a chance to see my kids and my grandkids. And she's okay with that. She doesn't, tell me, oh my God, I wish you would, mourn me and grieve for me and pull, hair off your chests every day.
That's crazy.
So I think that's what men have to do is just get back to being okay with who they are and what they are first. Step one. And if you don't yet know what that is, find some really good models. And ideally, if you're a young man, if you're 30, 40, even 50 years old, find some old men who figured it out and hang out with them. Buy them a drink, go smoke a cigar, sit on the stoop, whatever you need to do to absorb some of that old masculinity that they possess and they've grounded completely. That's what I would say. I would give advice to the audience, to anybody who might be listening to me, and give a damn about what I say.
Joseph, we're going to make sure we put your information in the show notes. I got a few guys to introduce you to that you should go on those shows. I think they'll love you. I really appreciate you coming down. I'm just taking some notes on what you said.
Sure.
This has been fun. We'll do this again. God bless you, brother.
You too, man. Thanks so much for having me, Nikki.
No, thanks for coming.
Wish everybody well. Cheers, man.
Thank you for listening to the Sovereign Man Podcast. If you're ready to take charge of your life and become the man you've always wanted to be, we invite you to join the movement at sovereignman.ca.